Fujifilm just released firmware updates for a bunch of their cameras. Hi everyone and welcome to Pal to Tech. Today we are talking about brand new firmware updates for the following Fujifilm cameras: the GFX 100 and 100S, the X-T5, X-T50, XM5, X106, and the XH2 and XH2S. And interestingly, a couple of these new updates I literally just talked about in my prior two videos. We'll get to that in just a sec. But first, regarding the GFX 100 and 100S, today's firmware update, it's just sort of a bug fix to resolve display issues that if you connect an external monitor to the camera and you have your output set to HDMI raw video, there have been display issues on the external monitor, so now that bug has now been fixed. Speaking of bugs, one of the more notable ones has to do with certain types of SD cards. This bug affected the X-T50, the X-T5, the X106, XH2, and XH2S cameras, as well as the XM5. And the problems range from the camera not being able to sometimes write out to the SD card, all the way up to the camera not even being able to turn on when certain kinds of SD cards were inserted. According to Fujifilm, all of these bugs for all of those affected cameras have now been resolved. Speaking of the XM5, they've now fixed the issue that if you have a large number of images that you're selecting in playback mode, and then you're trying to transfer them from the camera, say to the Fujifilm app, the speed would slow down. So that has now been fixed, and you should see a faster, more consistent transfer speed. Another bug that's now been fixed on the XM5, XH2 and 2S, and the X106 as well as the X-T5 camera has to do with certain audio and ISO settings that were not being saved nor remembered in the camera's custom settings feature. Once you turned off the camera and then turned the camera back on, your setting changes for the audio or the ISO settings were not remembered. That's now been fixed. Also, for the X106, there were issues with the lens shutter movement count being reduced. Interestingly enough, because either switching the playback mode to either setup or USB mode, or if it was connected to certain Fujifilm software programs. Honestly, I have no idea about this particular bug, but if you are an X106 owner, it's now been fixed. And finally, for the X-T5, as well as the XH2 and the XH2S cameras, there are now two new features that have been added. The first has to do with exposure changes while turning the aperture ring using the new 16 to 55mm lens. And interestingly, this is exactly what I discussed in my prior video, and just watch. On the XM5, it's like someone just turned out the lights slowly. However, put it on an X-T5, watch what happens now when I rotate the aperture ring. See how it's going, So it's now been fixed. Unfortunately, I had to return that 16 to 55mm lens back to Fujifilm, so I can't do a comparison test for you, but I'll just take your word that it's been resolved. And the second feature added, and I literally just made a video on this, is that Fujifilm has now added additional features to the linear focus setting for the focus ring operations section of the menu. You now have the ability to also set the focus ring rotating angle. The focus ring rotating angle is located in the button dial setting of your camera menu right here. Here's what it looked like before today's firmware update. As you can see, there's two choices here, linear or non-linear. If you don't understand what these two settings do, go check out my video from last week. Now here's what the menu looks like after the firmware update has been applied. Check this out. You can see that they've separated it out by both stills and movie mode. If you go into focus ring operation right now, if you choose linear, you now have all of these options, including some custom ones as well. On the video side of things, exactly the same settings, but dedicated for video. Obviously, this setting right here will change depending upon what type of lens you have attached to the camera. There is one final bug fix I want to mention that's specifically for the X-T5, XH2, and XH2S cameras. And that has to do with setting the camera on continuous high-speed burst rate, your shutter set to E front curtain, and your flicker reduction set to all frames. If all of those conditions were true, then yes, there would be cases where the camera would freeze up. That has now been fixed. With all of these updates, Fujifilm does also mention that minor bugs have now been fixed. I don't know what those minor bugs are, but I will tell you that minor bugs have now been fixed. I will leave a link down in the description below this video that goes directly to the Fujifilm Firmware update page where you can choose your camera and then see exactly what has been updated. I will also leave a link to Fujifilm's official instructions on exactly how to update your firmware. Remember that the most important part of updating your firmware is making sure that you are using a fully charged battery and that your camera is not low on power while you're performing your firmware update. Well, that wraps up today's firmware update. And in fact, I had a Fast Friday that got preempted by this. So those of you that need the firmware update, go get it. Get some use out of this video. In the meantime, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found the video helpful or at least entertaining. And if you did, be sure to give it the like and subscribe. Also, if you are confused about linear versus non-linear focusing, go check out my video on that. And I also have the lens review on the 16-55 as well. I am going to be signing off now, but have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you in a new video next week. Take care.